Okay. Welcome to the August 2022 edition of New Hampshire User Experience Professionals meeting. We have a great panel discussion this evening led by Peter Kruthroff and several of his great friends. And let's see, Peter is a principal user researcher at Truist, and he is a big proponent of cloud management, automation, and open source. And I'm very excited to learn more from you and all your fellow panelists this evening. So I will hand over the share screen.
Perfect. And you can, there we go. So first and foremost, call me Pete, not Peter. Yeah, my mom used to call me Peter, but everybody else Pete. So, you know, about, oh boy, you're gonna have to help me, Christy and Melissa, but I would say maybe in August, we were part of a panel at UXPA International. And, the name of that specific topic was Too Big, Too Small, or Just Right, understanding which company structure works best for you. But something, at least in my opinion, I don't know if you experienced it, but something kind of, dare I say, magical kind of happened. And it felt like the conversation pivoted from looking outward at these companies to maybe turning around and sort of looking inward and identifying kind of what are these things about you that make you really strong at what you do or not so strong at what you do, or what are the things that you value that should help drive your decisions on where you would want to work. I don't know, Christy, did you get that sense as well?
Yeah, I did. I think it became more personal than we planned. So that was maybe something really nice about that venue or that group. I don't know. But I do think it's both things, right? You have to look at the company you're going into, but you also have to know yourself and what's important to you and what your goals are. And that's going to help you decide where you need to go.
Yeah. What about you, Melissa? Did you get that sense as well from the panel? You were there.
Absolutely. Though I would say some of it was more relevant than other portions of it, as with any discussions like this.
Sure.
But yes, I think there was a fair amount of discussion about both priorities in terms of what you look for in a job, what kind of trajectory you want in a job, what kind of getting away from maybe this traditional path and thinking about what different options might be and what's most comfortable or exciting for you, even some personality type things. And then there were some learnings that were shared too, in particular about learning from failures too, and how to know when something isn't a good fit and isn't working well, based on how it's making you feel, as opposed to some kind of performance review, right? So you might be doing great at the job. We had one individual on the panel was talking about a job where she had done a really good job, but it wasn't fulfilling to her, and why, and what she needed to change. So there was a lot of that.
Yeah, it was super interesting. And the thing I thought was pretty awesome was there's a lot of people that came up to us after the panel and were kind of grateful, right? Because it felt like that conversation wasn't happening. Maybe it should. And so it felt to me like, this is maybe a path that we want to go to as a team and explore a little bit more. And so, that's what we're talking about today. Before we get started with the questions, what I really want to do is have the panel members introduce themselves. I'll pick the first one, and at that point you can popcorn to the next person to have them introduce themselves. So I'm gonna start with Ross.
Okay, I hope I'm off mute. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. I'll try to keep this short, but I should have raised my hand earlier when I said you were asking about job seekers. So I'm actually looking for a job right now. I'm interviewing for a job, and I've had some really good conversations with people so far. But so everything getting prepared for this meeting was kind of fun, because I was like, I have been thinking about goals and values, and I have turned down offers where people have said, here's an offer. It's like, I don't think you fit my way of thinking and what I'm looking to do both personally and professionally. But I'm a UX leader. I've held director positions and led global multidisciplinary teams, design teams, and in terms of design strategy firms and healthcare and banking and retail. That's kind of who I am. I got into this space through design research. And so that's really where my background has been, sort of my strengths. And I focus a lot on accessible design and measurement of experience. So a lot of those kinds of activities, bringing sort of human factors into design. So risk assessments and measurement and systems approach to solving problems, as well as the ROI of UX. And so my background is in human factors and applied cognitive psychology. So that's who I am.
Perfect. I'll have you choose the next person.
Gretchen.
Hey, thank you. Gretchen McNeely, and appreciate the chance to be here today. Haven't worked with Pete in a while, so it's always a good time. I'm a design director with Accenture Song, formerly Fjord, probably the brand name people know a little bit better. And I came into design leadership from design research, specifically in clinical environments. Healthcare is definitely my preferred environment. So I focus on ethnography, blue sky ideation, and I'm very heavy emphasis on team leadership and growing the practice and growing practitioners who are new to the field. My other thing I spend a lot of time doing at Accenture is focusing on queer leadership and representation in UX and design. And I do want to give a shout out. I was a Dartmouth undergrad. You see the color of the wall behind me. So I am so pleased to be speaking to people in New Hampshire tonight. Got my Dartmouth songbook. So much appreciated. I was back there in June and I'll be there in October. Let's send it over to Christy Harper.
Hi, okay, I'm Christy Harper. I have a master's degree in psychology from University of Houston Clear Lake. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I was lucky to discover the UX research field. And I worked at Compaq and HP for 17 years. So when we started there, we were called human factors engineers. And through the years, our titles changed into UX research, although our jobs didn't really change. Our titles did. And before I left, I was managing a small team of researchers and working in the design team on personal systems. And 5 years ago, a business partner and I started end-to-end user research. So that's a consultancy. And we do recruiting for participants. We have rentals of our space for usability labs and focus groups. And we do consulting, obviously, on human factors, UX research. And it's been really exciting. And we're over 20 employees now. So it's been a very exciting 5 years. And I guess let's send it to Melissa.
Oh, hello. I am Melissa Mygast. I am here in Houston, Texas, and I started in human factors as an undergrad. I studied human factors in HCI at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and then went on to study in grad school at Rice University in Houston, and started out at NASA working in the UTAP, which was their usability testing and analysis facility for the International Space Station. Went for that and ended up at Compaq, which is how I ran into Christy. And later, when it became HP, how I ran into Pete. And I now run a team there that is a research program. And so my role is like a rogue, I think they called me the research Ronin lately, was the nickname one of my teams gave me. But I serve as a rogue consultant. So I work across the business looking for projects where there's a need for UX research or UX mentoring. We also do some classical human factors and getting more into things like eye tracking, some of those more behavioral metrics, anthropometry, ergonomics. But most of it ends up being within the UX space of things. And it's everything from software as a service to web-based applications to hardware to flash flicker rates and seizure triggers, just a whole range of different things. Yeah, that's me. But did we get everyone in our group or am I missing someone?
Chance.
There you go.
Not me. So hello, everyone. I'm Dan Chance. I'm the User Experience Research Director at Truist Bank for our retail, wealth, and business segments. I got started, well, my background's in human factors as well, like many of the folks here. Got my master's at NC State. First place I got started was at a small social networking gaming app company. And to date myself a little bit, after me and my partners got to it, we wound up becoming the #2 app on MySpace. That's right. From there, I went to work for Lenovo. I was in hardware for 5 years as a human factors engineer. And then I went and I've been at the bank for about 6 years now. And we have also seen some growth. The banking industry is very slow to respond to just about anything. And it took them probably until 2 or 3 years ago to recognize that, the field is probably important. We could probably do some good things for people. So we have actually grown significantly. When I started, it was a mighty team of 5. And now after a merger and a whole bunch of explosive growth, we have about 40 researchers alone, not even including the UX designers, UI designers. So definitely wrangling, scaling quickly is what I've been specializing in the past couple of years. But it's been great, and yeah, pleasure to speak today.
So is that everybody, just to check? I think so, but okay, perfect. So let's start with our first question. Here we go. So what are your core beliefs about user experience? And I'm going to start with Ross, if you don't mind. Ready to go first?
Of course. So what, this is the topic that came up this week in some of the conversations I've been having. To me, UX, I think to me, one of my core beliefs is that UX is at its core a problem-solving activity. And I think that the research tools that we use and the design methods that we use and other approaches to that are all just methods that we use to solve problems. And I know it's kind of a small mind shift, really. It's not, maybe you could say, it's not that big a deal, but I think it's an important discussion to have is, what does it mean to be a problem solver? Because I think when you talk about problems, you think about what causes those problems, and which gives you more of a contextual view of what's going on, as opposed just to the user being there and kind of having this, they present with a problem. Okay, well, let's understand what's behind that. I think you go a little deeper into people when you think about it as a problem-solving activity. I also think you start thinking about assessment and measurement. So to me, I always try to treat my teams as problem. I kind of try to get away from, we call each other designers, and they're a UI designer, UX designer, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, everybody's kind of working together to solve that problem. And so I always think about that and sort of emphasize that to people, because then they have to spend more time defining the problem and sort of defining what somebody cares about. I think the other big belief, and I've been in this for a long time, but the other big belief that I have is that the more successful companies in terms of design think about everyone in their company as a user experience designer. And I don't mean that, let me explain what I mean, but not everybody is a UX designer, but everyone in the company has the ability to screw up the overall user experience. And so I think that's one of the areas where I've really tried to focus, is just even outside of the UX team, is make sure that everyone has ownership over that experience. And there's all kinds of examples out there about companies that are well known for their design. They'll even say, we don't have any UX people. They're all, everyone is a UX person or whatever. That's fine. But I think that it's one of the key things that I try to think about, because somebody asked me this week, they said, can you tell me about how your UX team makes sure that UX is optimized for the product? And I always say, I could talk about design systems and demos and communication, all those kind of things. But I turned it back around to them. I said, are you telling me that everybody at your company doesn't feel ownership of UX? Are you telling me that it's just in a small group of people? And so I'll leave it at those first two. I thought about other sort of core beliefs, but I'll leave it at that for now. But I think, I think about truly it's like a problem solving approach. What does that really mean? And then just like thinking about this as everybody can wreck the user experience. Somebody in development doesn't care. Somebody in product doesn't care. QA doesn't care. Whatever it is that's part of our mission, is to help people to think and understand that.
Okay. Dan Shantz, what about you?
Yeah, I love that. I'm actually, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking almost the polar opposite, where one of my core beliefs is specialization. And I know that when you gave your explanation, I'm like, all right, we're on the same page.
Yes.
But yeah, I highly believe that specialization in roles, even in the UX domain, leads to better efficiencies and it leads to better quality work all around.
Yes.
And that's just from experience, which we'll talk about later as other questions come up. But the other core belief I have, and this one will probably ruffle some feathers, but I don't necessarily believe that UX is a core need for a business, and I'll talk about what I mean. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need food, water, shelter, and Wi-Fi, right? Those are like the big four. And I really attribute user experience to the Wi-Fi piece of that. Like, yeah, you might not need it to survive and exist, but you imagine what you could do with your company, with your business, with your life, with anything you need, any goals you have. We really empower just about anything that you would want to do, whether it's getting more users, whether it's making the experience better, whether it's making people's lives easier, if you're in medical field, whether it's about bottom line and improving your dollar. We really are that kind of steroid injection to really help whatever you need in an efficient and meaningful way.
Perfect. So, Melissa, you know what's interesting? I was just looking. So I used to work for Ross. I now work for Dan, and used to work with Melissa, get bossed around by Melissa on occasion. So at some point,
You have
I'm
good
going to,
advice.
at some point, I'll end up working for Christy, I'm sure. So Melissa, where's your head
What am I,
at,
chopped
Melissa?
liver?
I'm sorry.
Well, I think one thing Ross and Dan hinted at that I think is also very key to this, especially within the research domain, is that when we're talking UX research, that very often gets treated as something that's transactional, and it is not. It's relationship based. And I think if you are going to succeed at all as a research program, as a researcher, when you start treating those activities like they're transactional, you will fail. And I've been seeing a lot of that lately when I'm dealing with more junior researchers. So that's something that I think comes up again and again. And it has to do with that being egalitarian with ownership of both responsibility and the ability to get involved with people.
What do you mean by transactional? Can you dive on that a little bit?
Here we want you to do some research, and then we, the research team, take it. It's ours. We own it. We run off with it. You don't sit in on it. You hear our results. You are expected to consume those results. I've watched this kind of desire to be slightly territorial about ownership of those results, and that doesn't work. You will fail all the way along the line, and at the end of the day, you may produce something beautiful that no one will consume. I've watched that happen too.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is one of the ways is, if we believe this idea that everyone in the company can influence the UX design, obviously, to Dan's point, they're not UX designers, but through their actions, they can do that. The question is, well, then what can, as a UX person, what can we do to influence them to the better? And part of that is through the empathy that they can build through understanding who the users are. And what Melissa's talking about is sharing that research, involving people in the research, not just making it a throw it over the wall and they look for the one thing that matters to them to answer their question. That's one of the ways of influencing other people to be a better quote unquote designer.
Yeah, and having them, part of what I think is really key is having a very large collaborative team from the get-go. So when I'm designing a project, I want developers, I want front and back end dev, I want docs, I want program managers, I want marketing. I want them all to be involved in it, because when they're involved from the get-go, they own it and they feel responsible for it and they take it and they evangelize it and it gets used and we produce much better research. And that's my soapbox. One of them. I'm sure I found others.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. So any other responses from the group? We want to go on to the next question. Let's
I just want to note, so Linda had a question related, I think, so making it more actionable for the team with data and deliverables. Is that kind of what you mean, Melissa?
That's part of it, right? But part of the way that something's actionable is your user isn't just the group you're studying. Your users are your consumers of your research. It's multi-directional. So when you treat it like the data is just this byproduct that you hand off, that doesn't work. So if you want the data to be actionable, that means you have to think about all your users And those users are also who's consuming that, and they need to be involved, and they need to own it. And that's part of how you make it actionable. And there's little things about how you format it, but really that's much, much less relevant than creating that ownership and that involvement and having all those different team members be part of it in different skill sets and being able to carry that forward. I watch projects get taken off and kind of run on their own, and the end result is something that either didn't match what the stakeholders really needed. They don't trust it, right? So they want to go back and look at things and go, hey, can we see the videos? And that's not where you want to be.
Great, thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, just to jump in, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think your work can only go as far as your partners will allow it to. And your partners might be your stakeholders, they might be your counterparts on, a stakeholder team or the design team, but absolutely, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And it's so much more fun. I mean, I do not know back end dev in and out. So when I get those folks involved, they have interesting comments, they ask good questions, they have different insights. It's a lot more fun. You learn a lot more. It makes your day a lot richer. I love the big teams I work with when we all pull in and discuss and brainstorm, and it makes it so much more enjoyable.
So I'm gonna ask a question, Melissa, just kind of based on that, which is, so you have this like involvement from everybody around you. Do you ever feel like the need though to establish, I guess it'd be referred to as sort of swim lanes, where suddenly maybe people are becoming a little bit too involved in your work?
Boundaries.
Yes, boundaries is another good word to be used.
Sometimes, I mean, I think that some of that's how you present yourself at the outset. I have a little bit of a advantage in some cases. So HPE is a technical career path, and it's a fairly hard path to get on, and you have to show patents, and you have to show domain expertise, and you have to show expertise beyond the company. And so that title attached to my role gives me a fair amount of credibility when I walk into meetings to push on those things from time to time. But it's also, most people, I think, want to be good collaborators, right? So every once in a while, we have to have discussions about, say, data privacy, right? And, how is it appropriate? If you're going to watch the sessions, and don't take one session as gospel, watch multiple. When is it, how do we appropriately talk about what we saw? How are we respectful to the participants? What's appropriate to share? And those things happen from time to time. But I think, again, if you are creating a relationship-based research program, those are conversations that are happening throughout with your stakeholders, right? And they'll get it over time. And a lot of the teams I work with, I've been working with since before their product existed to now we're on like the third rev of it, and we might be incorporating, we're doing this big as a service transformation. So we're gutting things and rebuilding, and we're working. So you establish those patterns over time too. But yes, I mean, sometimes there are reminders needed. Sometimes there's bad behavior where things need to be, discussed kindly. And you just have to have, I think, a respectful and thoughtful reason for why, right? It's not about the individual, that they just didn't know something about this. No one's trying to jeopardize anything. Right.
So let's bounce to the next question in the interest of time. So how do you identify your personal values, kind of goals and strengths? And I think, add a little bit of context to this question. Let's why don't you kind of roll in how it kind of relates to your decisions around where you choose to work, or what groups that what you're looking for in your next company. And I'd love to start with Gretchen on this one, if you don't mind, Gretchen.
Sure. I think I would start by thinking about that strengths piece. One of the things I found, I guess I've been in this part of design about 17 years, and one of the things I find I am really, really looking for in a company is how do they offer two-way feedback or multi-path feedback on my performance and me to others? How frequent is it? What are the frameworks around it that make that feedback actionable for me or for other people? How easy is it for me to pattern based on that? And how how can I draw from that feedback to figure out how my strengths, which I mean, at this point, I have a really good sense of my professional strengths, how they are morphing, how they are weakening, how they're improving. So that's one of the things I really look for is, are they going to give me a sense to dive into my strengths and my opportunities? And then if I find I have a weakness or an opportunity, do they offer an environment for me to decide what to do about that? And one of the best pieces of advice I got at a design conference a million years ago was someone said, really dive into the things that you're great at and manage the things that you don't care about. Well, managing the things you don't care about takes a lot of different forms. And what are the ways that company can allow you as a leader to manage that, which might mean learning about it and being bad at it for a while. I look for them to offer mentorship and guidance along the way at any level when someone enters a company. And that's something I'm very happy about with Accenture. In terms of how I notice my values coming into play or not with a company, I look at the ways, and this kind of, Pete, will go back to a talk at a paper that you and I have given a couple times about the 10 questions, right? That design folks can ask a potential manager. I will want to know, what is the structure of teams? How do I see through anecdotal story? I mean, it's always about story, I think. How do I see teammates being treated? What diversity do I see? Not just at the practitioner level, you have to look at high-end leadership. Does that diversity in its multifaceted forms cut out? And at what point does it cut out? And I think, Melissa, you mentioned this early on. You said something about it's based on how it's making you feel. And I do a lot of that. I focus in on how my body is feeling a lot at work. And am I feeling uncomfortable? Am I feeling isolated? Am I feeling like I'm not bringing best practice in? And I try to really sit with that and figure out where it is that my values are being unpleasantly scratched at. So maybe not even acting on it so quickly as more sitting with it.
Yeah, one of the things I want to just kind of build on what you said there, Gretchen, is in some of the interviewing that I've been doing lately is asking people about just that, is how are people how are people helped to be successful in this role? It's one of the things that I've been looking for when I'm talking with different companies. Some folks will say, hey, we're going to throw you right in the fire. And I don't actually mind that. But the problem is that that's sort of the least efficient way to get someone up to speed and the least successful sort of way to do it. So I don't mind doing that if there's sort of a support network. One of the companies I was talking to puts a team in place to support you for the first 18 months. Part of their, like 5% of their job is making you a success. Like that's rare. I mean, that's pretty cool. And so I'm really just looking for something. I'd be happy with something on the in between there, because what I feel like it really does is it comes down to respect for me and my, and do they want me to succeed? I think that's a huge part of what I look for. And one of my values is trying to give respect to other people, but also, do people respect my expertise? Do they respect user experience inside of the company? Like, can I feel that? But then also, really, do they put their money where their mouth is when they talk about being respectful of people? It's like, well, give me some examples of that. I mean, I just, as a reminder to everybody, is when people are asking you those same sort of questions in an interview, going, hey, tell me about a time you did whatever, and then at the end you get to ask some questions, feel free to turn those back around on them. Tell me about an example of how your organization helped people become successful, or tell me about a time when you did whatever. Put them on the spot for that as well, as opposed to, do you guys believe in supporting people? Yes, we do. Okay, cool. That sounds great. Ask them that.
Well, it shouldn't feel like grad school. That's always the analogy I use. The thing that defense, where you're waiting for everyone to find the holes with everything you've done and pull it apart, and they're all secretly kind of we're all trying to get each other. And this is why I didn't go into academia. I don't want a job that feels like that, right? So it starts feeling like that, where it's constantly like, who's sneaking up on me?
Yeah. think it's really important to feel supported. And I think it's important, as Gretchen mentioned, to be able to know what you need to do, what you need to work on, and how to move up. Like for many years, I was in an organization where the feedback was not very precise, and sort of there was no way to, you're in this sort of ranking or rating, and this other rating is there, but it's just not obtainable. Don't worry about it. This kind of, we're only allowed to put 2% of the entire population in this, excellent rating. So, just keep doing what you're doing, which is, kind of a disheartening message to get, right? And there's no clear action from that. There's no understanding of you and how you can improve. So things like that are, sort of very frustrating. I think I got into this field. I love to help people. And I think of this, you're solving problems, but you're also helping people. So I want to be helped myself though too, right? So I don't mind, reaching out, mentoring, training, helping others, but it's nice to also get that from the top. So when you're looking at different companies, it's important to think about, if that kind of structure is provided for you, or if it's, and sometimes maybe that's better at smaller companies. Sometimes the bigger companies don't have that, or maybe maybe it's just your particular manager. Maybe you're just in a big company, which is a great company, but if you were in maybe a different department, you'd have a different experience. So there's a lot that can go into it when you're trying to determine where to go and what's going to be the best fit for you. But there are definite red flags that tell you when it's time to, think about a move.
Gretchen, I like what you said about the sort of that self-check that you talk about doing. I think that's how do I feel? Do I feel anxious every time I have to go do this thing that is easy for me to do, but I'm doing it? I kind of look at that as that sort of that Sunday night feel about like Monday, or either Monday morning kind of feel.
Sunday
like,
scaries.
Yeah.
Sunday scaries.
Do I want to get out of bed today? Do I want to? I think I'm careful to describe this because don't look at hard work or challenging problems or conflict as something to run away from. I mean, there's a reason we do what we do, but it's that kind of feeling of, I take it back to respect, but am I being supported? Am I happy about what I'm doing? I mean, in the interviewing I've been doing, I look to see, do people sound like they're having any fun? Right? Like, are they enjoying what they do? Is it just, are they monotone? Or, yeah, it's a great place to work. No, of course we love it. Tell me a story. Let me hear that. Like, do they sound inspired? Right? Do they sound like what they're doing matters to them? I think those are things that, I want to be respected and I want to have fun at the same time. Meaningful work is important, but can you really pull that out? I love that idea of sort of that self-assessment of your physically, not just saying, am I in the right role for my expertise? And that's fine, but just that physical, you know yourself. I mean, that feeling of sort of dread, or that feeling of I'm not growing. I think that's a really huge look internal to sort of make that judgment. I'm glad you asked that question.
Pete, I see a number of great notes in the chat, and one of them calls on red flags that you might encounter. I think you can encounter them in the hiring process. You could reassess, as they say. That gets pretty close to a question I know we're touching on later about not accepting a role. You're the boss.
We should answer it now?
I
Let's
mean,
jump in.
yeah,
Totally.
It's what the people want. So I have, finally gotten to the point where I am comfortable saying, in an interview, and I'm always interviewing. I'm very happy at Accenture, but I'm always interviewing. I think it's important to know what's out there. And I say I am looking for 4 things. And I've had people be very honest with me. They'll say, I can give you 2 of those or 3 of those, but maybe I can give you all 4. And for me, it's I want to have clear mentorship upward. I want to have creative leadership I trust and would take a bullet for, right? Hard to find. I want to be able to mentor junior folks. That's a big part of how I identify myself. I want to have a clear professional path. I want to know, I don't have to know where I'm going, but I just need to know that there's a bunch of options of places I might go, and there's a clear path marked out for how to get there. And I want, this is not what everyone needs. I want to be surrounded by designers and researchers. And there's all sorts of jobs I've had where I was doing the same thing and I was surrounded by other people. And for me, it is very important to be in a design environment. So that's a third thing I'm looking for. And then the fourth is really an understanding that the company has of how they're currently using, let's say, design research, and that they find this to be measurably beneficial, that they think they need to get somewhere, that they want to go to that place, and they think there's the opportunity for growth. So if I'm in an interview where someone is saying, we have got it sucked, we are on lock with design research, I'm less likely to find that I'm going to be able to influence them positively. I want them to have a sense of the opportunity for growth in the field. If I don't see those things, those are my flags. And what along with the other things I mentioned about, I have ended the interview process because a company said, we know diversity is important, we're really not there yet. And I was like, get on it. There are wonderful models in and outside of our community and corporate environments of how to attract and retain and engage diverse talent. That's, for me, the number one red flag, along with the others I just mentioned.
What's interesting is, so I went through a series of interviews, I don't know, this is before I took the job with Truist. And it's super interesting. I kind of stretched myself a little bit. And what I would say to the person interviewing me is, do you have a culture of kindness? And what you sort of found was either people were sort of sympathetic or understood, right? And you'll get this really, we're talking about stories, right? And they'll say, I joined this company specifically because I was in a really rotten culture and I wanted to be somewhere where I was appreciated and I felt like people were concerned about me. And then there's, another group of people that are like, and they kind of struggle with it, and that for me is like a really huge flag. It's almost like if you talk about kindness, they're almost uncomfortable with the topic of kindness and how dare you even talk about this during an interview. But for me, that's a huge flag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saving a question for later, but I'll bring it up now, which was kind of how do we look for these red flags? And that kind of gets at some of mine. But one of the things that I always ask about is the company's propaganda, right? Do you align with the values of the propaganda? The company I came from, their propaganda was sales. It's like, look, we sold this terrible product that just fundamentally is not good to, these starving children in Africa. And look how good job, Timmy for doing, sorry if anyone's named Tim, good job, Timmy, for being, such a great salesperson. And when I came to Truist now, I look at the propaganda and the propaganda is like, Jean held the door open for a client who's walking into the branch after hours. Like, thank goodness for Jane that she's putting the clients first. So I would say propaganda is one of those backdoor questions I always ask about. Like, what does your company celebrate? What do they want the team to think about? Or what do they want the company to think about as a good shining star for how we should, operate?
I think it's interesting because I'm cautiously optimistic that companies are starting to get it and sort of realize the reason people are leaving companies is, as we all know, because of, excuse my language, shitty managers, right? And what are the ways, if you have a culture of kindness, I would assume that also means your managers, right? Which is where you want to be. So it's not just touchy-feely. I think it's becoming competitive.
I also like that you use the word propaganda, because I think sometimes that's what it is, right? It is really propaganda. And what I want to know is what you're putting out there on the social media, on LinkedIn, and all of these comments, celebrating different days, are you really acting on that? Or are you just putting out the little tweets and messages, but not really being inclusive in the way you structure your leadership team? And I think a lot of companies have been called out for that lately. And I think that's a positive thing. That's something that really needs to happen.
The culture of kindness is really important to think about. And I have a bias toward the larger company because, I mean, I've worked with a company with 8 people. I work for a company with 700,000 people right now. And however, when I think about how they manifest a culture of kindness, I'm looking for, I just wrote down grow, give, and gather. Like, how do they let me grow? What are the conference opportunities for everyone at the company external to the company? An area that we do poorly in, by the way. How do I grow? How do they let me give? What are the volunteering opportunities? How are they tied into the community? I think irrespective of size. And then the third one is, how do I gather, ERGs, any sort of employee interest groups, be it professional or personal, what is offered, or if I come with the idea at a smaller company, what flexibility do they have to let me follow that? So those are other ways that I think kindness can be manifested.
So we've been jumping around a little bit. Let's talk about personal values when deciding to accept a role with the company. Do we feel like we as a team touched on that, or do we need to jump in a little bit more and dig?
I could say one thing about that. I think it's important that you have impact. And I think sometimes when you get into a company and the user-centered design process is not mature, or if you get into part of a company and that's the case, you end up doing work that is not impactful, because if you're only doing work at the end of the process, right, you're not discovering unmet needs, you're not solving big problems, you're just doing tiny little tweaks and fixes, and that's not really fulfilling to a researcher. So yeah, so I think it's that's something that's important, is to make sure that the company is mature enough that you're able to have impact from the beginning all the way through, not just, brought in at the end for almost like a QA type thing.
Ross, I'm curious to know, when you were interviewing, was there like one very specific, kind of personal value that you really looked at when evaluating these companies? And I'm gonna build on this a little bit. I'd like to kind of create a bridge between, like, Ross, your personal values, right, outside of work, and then your values at work, and what that overlap looks like.
Yeah. So, and whether we talk about it I'll just say this, and you can figure out if there's a bridge here or not, right? So I talked a little bit about this concept of, like, I like to have a good time. I like to have fun, and I like to do it in a meaningful way. And I like to live my life in a meaningful way. I don't like to waste a lot of time. And I like to do things that are, focused on fun or health, or, serving, do some service kind of things that I do, but I like to really kind of do those. And the same thing about respect, right? I like to treat people with respect, and my friends, and look for ways to lift up people that maybe don't always get lifted up. And I look for that sort of in a company. That's sort of those personal values. But then if I think about the values that I'm looking for from a UX perspective, because companies can meet that, like, or at least they can at least make you think they meet that. For me, I've been seeing where I say, well, as we were talking about before, is there room for growth? Does UX kind of have a voice or a seat at the table? And what are specific examples of how UX has done that? Do they report to the right location, where they have support and can do the sorts of things they want to do? Are there good design challenges, right? Are there fun things to actually focus on? And so I've been talking with some of the companies lately that meet my high level values of, some healthcare companies and some enterprise software and some banking companies and things like that. But I've told a couple of them no, because there's not enough responsibility or oversight that I'm looking to do, or the products turned out they weren't that interesting. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, and the company meets my personal values, And then, the other one is that we've touched on this a little bit, is that they don't really value research as a part of this. Like, oh yeah, well, we've got people that have been out in that space for years. We know all about that. It's like, okay, red flag, there's a red flag, there's the one that's just going crazy. So for me, I think I have my personal values that I'm looking for, but then I have my professional values, and those values are sort of, does the company value research? Does the company value UX? Does the company value people in a certain, in a way that's sort of meaningful to me? And I, selfishly, and I think we all have done this, right? We have to look at a job. We haven't used this term. We've been using nice terms like kindness and things. We need to be selfish when we're looking for jobs. We need to think about, is this job going to meet my needs? Is this job going to help me grow? Is this job going to be fun for me to do? Is this job, and so forth? I don't know if people think about that or voice that enough, but I've been crazy selfish, as I've been going through this process of, not stopping interviews midway, but not continuing on down the interview path where I'm like, I'm not gonna work for these folks. This would not be someplace that I would ever want to work.
There's one thing you said too I wanted to touch on, because that, does the company value research? That's a huge one for me as a researcher. So when I see a disproportionate amount of designers to researchers, or I see designers with dual roles, or they say they value research, but you ask them what their budgets are and they don't have dedicated research budgets, they don't have dedicated tool sets. Those are all things, at least as a researcher, I would say are a very, very strong flag, kind of circling back to that question earlier. That's something
Melissa,
came to mind when you're saying that.
What you said makes me think, and what Ross said makes me think about the interview where they're trying to figure out if you're the unicorn.
Absolutely, and that's scary, right?
That's like the flag. That's the flag of the day, is the unicorn.
Especially if they ask you about your coding expertise, then you should just leave.
Oh yeah, I was interviewing for a VP position where they asked me how my wireframes were. And I was like, we're not having the same conversation, I don't think.
Yes.
So that's something to watch out for. And it's not necessarily a comment on generalization versus specialization. It's just, you're going to run into those scenarios Melissa outlined that are not going to set you up to succeed.
I just ask people flat out, I go, especially when I'm talking with people who should know these kind of things, or on the product team, hey, tell me about how research had an impact on this project. Just flat out, right? And can they talk about, well, we discovered this this goal that people had and we kind of turned it into an opportunity, or we fueled our brainstorming with it, or we changed direction based on what we were going to do. When people are like, oh, it's good. It's like, if they can't tell me stories about it, then I'm not interested in it. And I think you could say that budget comes along with that. If it is budgeted, they probably know those things. If there are the right kinds of people there, they do probably kind of know those things. But I just ask them to tell me some stories about this. I want to hear what's going on. So the other thing that happened to me the other day on a call was I was interviewing with one of the technical people on the product, and they started talking about what they were working on, and I was like, oh, okay. So they're like, yeah, I'm trying to determine if I should change the color scheme of this or not to represent something different. And I'm also trying to figure out if I need to change the kind of the mental model of this from being transactional to more of a relationship sort of thing in terms of the site. And I said, you're not working with the UX organization on that? And they're like, no, why would I do that? And I was just like, okay, that's someone off doing it by themselves. You don't typically have a UX person saying, hey, I've been recoding this whole thing. That doesn't happen, but people will talk about how they're doing their own research or they're doing their own design. And that's another sort of flag for me, especially when there is a team there who's supposed to be doing that kind of work.
Yeah, the scary thing about the unicorn is I also mentor a lot of people, and that's very important to me. And I see it a lot in small companies, and there are great small companies, but a lot of times they will, for cost, they will get a junior person and make them, just the UX, basically, this one person, and give them a really big title, like senior UX designer or senior UX researcher, et cetera. And they have no experience to draw from to be able to succeed in that role. And they have nobody to learn from, and they have nobody to support them. So it's really a recipe for disaster. And I think trying to put that all on a junior person, you know, who obviously commands less of a salary and everything. So, you know, I think we really have to be careful of that unicorn thing. And I don't know what the answer is, except, you know, run away from jobs that are asking you to do things that you can't do.
Well, you know, what's sort of interesting as well is, you know, especially around user research. So I think in user research, it's particularly bad around hiring kind of these junior people. I don't think, you know, user experience respects experience in user research enough. And, you know, one of the things I really look for, like in these interviews, is whether, you know, when you think about user research, are you hiring somebody junior because the way you think about it is very tactical, right? We want somebody to do a usability study for me. I want somebody to do some work around information architecture. I want somebody to do a series of one-on-one interviews. And what you're slowly finding out is because they're just not thinking strategically, right? So, you know, is user experience and user research strategic to you, or is it somebody moving shapes around on a screen, or, you know, doing some interviews with some stakeholders?
I want to address something that's in the chat because people are having really good commentary and discussion around imposter syndrome. And I think you can flip that script a little bit. I think something that excites me about a company and something could alternate be a red flag. What sort of vulnerability is leadership willing to show when it comes to practice? When it comes to them saying, wow, I have never done that before. Tell me about that. We've got a junior person who really understands that well. Or, you know, I haven't worked with that vendor before. How open is the company to someone saying that they don't necessarily know? And believe it or not, they don't know something about the field we work in. And what does the company do to disseminate and cross-pollinate knowledge in a way that supports everyone? I'm curious what the panel thinks of that, because we all do have that imposter syndrome to tame. And what if it can become a way for your team to become closer?
Do you mean, would it be nice to work in an organization where someone says, hey, I don't think I know a whole lot about that. Could I learn? Is that what you're saying?
Hey, a girl can dream, Ross.
You have to make it safe, right? And you can create safer spaces and less safe spaces, right? And so we have a fail fast mentality, right? So it's okay to fail, just do it quickly and get on with it, right? Don't let it bog you down. And I think there are ways to do that and make it work. But on the converse side of things, I want to be able to have enough autonomy. We get back to like that personal values. I want enough autonomy, authority. I'm not quite sure what the rest. I want a mandate to be able to, if I see a problem or I see something that's interesting and I think there's a need for research or there's a need for a program, that I have, the company is willing to let me explore that space, right? That there's some flexibility beyond the job description, beyond the immediate span of control, to go out and to dig into those things. Because I don't know, I think what you'll find in big companies, right, is we have all these different little subcultures, and when you start pulling them together, you get all these different problem spaces that start opening up, and they may not be truly a UX research question, right? You may need some other areas of expertise to pull into them, but you can develop some pretty cool programs that way if you have room to play and some authority to do so. And that's something that for me has been quite important as to why I'm in the role I am and why I've stayed there. Sorry, that was a bit of a side jaunt there, but
let's do a time check. So are we going about another 10 minutes? Is that right? Just so we can make sure we.
Yep, 10:15.
Okay, so it's flexible. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, there's not much to do at the very end, so.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and post the next question. We've been kind of all over the place, but I think this is an important one. I want to make sure we address it. So I just pasted it to the chat area, and that's, do you, we're, except for Dan, I guess, we're all pretty salty, right? We've been around for a while, seen a lot of stuff.
Just you, Pete.
Dan's working on MySpace. He's been around a little while.
Dan, you can be salty if you want to be salty.
I've
Dan,
been
you can be
salty.
I'll
always say that. I've got a little bit of salt exposure.
Okay, and I'm perfectly comfortable being very salty. Totally fine
And
with that.
what are you saying here, Pete? What are you saying?
I'm saying I like salty people. I'm saying they have like a lot of experience, of course. And the question I really have for the group is there, from the perspective of values, is there anything that, has caught your attention or has made you concerned about the profession that you think maybe needs to change or needs to be addressed? Ross, you're nodding.
Oh, shoot, was I on camera doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I don't know, you guys can talk to me offline or even now about it, but I've just kind of grown weary of this ever increasing sort of terminology of that someone who does human-centered design now looks down on someone who says they do user-centered design. And people have said this for years. The only two professions that call their customers users are drug dealers and experience designers. And it's like, okay, I get the point, and I get the idea that if you think about, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to raise the flag and say user-centered design is the best thing in the whole world. But I think when somebody describes to me something like that, oh, human-centered design, we're focused on the human. I go, which one? They're like, the one that uses the product. And I go, okay, we're talking about the user. I got you. Well, fine, we'll call them a human for now. What would human-centered design do differently? They're like, well, you really understand their skills and their concerns. Okay, well, if you're doing user-centered design or person-centered design or design thinking or whatever it is, that you would do that with rigor, you're going to do that. And I tend to talk about things. I've even heard humanity-centered design recently, and it's just the idea that people are just trying to kind of outdo each other with their own sort of whatever it might be. And I'm not suggesting that we don't need to have a really good focus on the human part of the part of this. I'm not suggesting that at all. My concern is that we start talking about these things and we ignore all the things that make it rigorous. We just keep trying to define a little flavor, or somehow there's a special group of people that, oh, those folks over there, they're doing something at a higher level, whereas somebody over here is really thinking about the problems in the right way. And I don't know why, I don't know if this is much of a concern, other than the fact that I think we get caught up in some of those things as opposed to saying, well, forget the name of it. What does it mean to do something in a real rigorous way? What does it mean to really think about the users as being part of a system, right? As opposed to just this user and some information that we're trying to design real well and create in a real user-friendly way. Like, what does a system approach to look like? And what does it look like to, if we think about from a human factor standpoint, we think more about risk, and we think more about measurement, and we think more about all these aspects of how does the client fit in this, the buyer fit into this? It's that back to that problem solving perspective. But I think the one thing I was kind of nodding my head around is that I try to read and keep up with what people are talking about, and I'll go, oh, here's a new one. Here's a new one. And recently I've been seeing intentional design, which I like that term. Intentional design, that sounds like rigorous design. But as I dive in, if you go and Google intentional design, what I found is it means this. You really need to focus on the user. I mean, we really, 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 really mean it. Like, that's what intentional design is. And I think about intentional design as being, well, what would it mean to be accessible, but not just to meet the standards, but to create a truly equivalent experience for someone who has disabilities? Like, that's an intentional approach to this, as opposed to just saying, yep, we checked the box, we met their needs. So let me jump down off off my soapbox, but it's that as designers and UX professionals, like, I'm all about methods and I'm all about results, and I'm just kind of bored by all the talking about the next big thing, when I promise you I could look back to some of these folks, Pete, you were kind of talking about people who've been doing this a long time. I could look back and say, hey, Christy, hey, Gretchen, whoever, I bet if you guys described to me how you were doing your design work and your research work 15 years ago, I think it would probably fit real well with what people are saying is the ideal approach to doing things now. And we can all grow, we can all learn, but my caution is just be careful about how we're talking about this. Talking down to other people. Oh, you're a UCD person. I'm an HCD person. No, stop. So
It's like the Sneetches, right? No stars upon bars. I mean, it's like, I'm more empathetic than thou. And
Right.
you know, the fetishization, I think, and it's completely agree. It's very much old wine, new bottles from my perspective.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Wow, you're like the single most quotable person I think I've heard in a while there, Gretchen.
It is. That's good.
I'm here for you,
Throwing
Pete.
stuff. Yeah, I know. I appreciate that too. So does anybody want to keep going on this?
Yeah,
Come on, you kill me. Dan,
yeah,
come on.
I got a quote I just heard, so I'll try and throw that in the mix. I'll kick in open doors on that one. But totally agree with what Ross was saying. I think part of that rigor is also interesting that I'm seeing almost a backlash in people who are trying to get started in the community from wanting to like do the due diligence up front to learn the skill and learn the craft. I mean, I follow like the UX research subreddit, and like the number of posts I've seen where somebody's like, are there any companies that would hire me for free? I'll work for a year. I won't, you know, I just want to learn. I want to get my foot in the door. I just want to do it. I'm willing to give up time and money and energy to make that happen. And I'm like, if you're willing to give up time and money and energy, just go to school, just get the grad degree. Like that's, I don't understand why are you giving all that up? Plus, no companies will hire you and not pay you. That's probably illegal in all, you know, in all states and countries. But so yeah, I think a little bit of that goes with that. You know, the field is a craft. It is a trade skill. It takes time to learn. It takes time to go through the motions and have the experience and fail, bump up against walls. And a lot of people just want to get into it and not have to go through all the bumps along the way.
I'd add to that too, because one of the things that drives me nuts is kind of a lack of empirical foundations, right? So we don't run necessarily controlled experiments all the time, right? I don't, you know, but this lack of understanding sometimes of covariates and confounds and bias and sample sizes and mean errors and all those things, why they might not apply to every single study. Having that foundational knowledge, I think, is key to even designing lightly qualitative studies. It makes for much, much better research. And the absence of those foundations leads to sloppy research and potentially misleading research that would have been better off not being conducted in the first place. And then the other thing that drives me nuts is accessibility when it's treated as some kind of continuum. It is binary. It is either accessible for that person or it is not.
Right.
When we treat it like it's kind of accessible, it doesn't work.
Right.
Related to that, Sophie says, I've seen some positive changes recently with a return to concerns about access, equity, and inclusivity, which seem to have been lost a bit in the frenzy of the digital boom of the previous years. Has anyone else on the panel observed that as well?
I have.
Melissa?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Want to add more to that?
And
Melissa?
I've definitely noticed it at, you know, just in general, the conversations about it, that people are being called out for not having diversity and inclusivity. The last UXPA, how many talks were on diversity and inclusivity and you know, having empathy and making sure that you're reaching out to and understanding, not only employing people, but using those people in your research and design so that there is a well-rounded pool of people and you're not just pulling from people who just look and act like you. So I think it's definitely come up more recently, and I think it's a definite positive change. I don't know what everybody else's experience has been.
I think it's both ways, right? So I see, so if you come from a traditional human factors background, right, we study accessibility, you had to learn the 508 stuff, like you spent a lot of time in grad school and all that. That's not something that I see as many new researchers having, but it's something that's, again, very learnable, right? So whether or not you learned it at school, you learn it later, it's totally learnable. So I think sometimes that skill set, that awareness perhaps as to what that fully means and what that looks like is not always there from the get-go. But I don't think that's something that is impenetrable to acquire, right? I do have, you know, I have a colleague, it's interesting. So our team actually ended up, one of the teams I work with, they're a research organization that then got merged with an inclusion group. And that group has a gentleman on the team who's blind. And he said one of the things that always drives him nuts is people assume he's dumb. That somehow if he's blind, he, you know, he can't be a lawyer. He was a software engineer, right? Now he runs this huge accessibility program, and he's like, this it's just common sense. Maybe this gets back to kindness, right? This assumption that people who are somehow not quite the same as us must not be as bright. And so I think that at least perhaps is changing. I think we're getting better about that we understand that people of all different backgrounds and abilities can be fully competent and have these full range of jobs, but I feel like there's still a gap.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we get afraid to ask, right? That's the other, I think that's the flip side of it too, is I think sometimes to have those conversations where it's okay to be vulnerable and say, am I being inclusive? Have I missed something? And did I do something wrong? How do I do that better? That can be a big risk for people. So, I know we have a coffee talk series that we've put together within our office to try to have some of these conversations in a way that makes it safe for people, where they can learn, because I think there's a real desire for across the company, not just within research, for people to improve in that space, but it doesn't always feel safe to ask how.
I can see that. And it's nice to bring some vulnerability and allow for that, because, sometimes at work, you feel like you're being, evaluated, right? Because, you have certain milestones you have to meet, and, you want to always put your best foot forward, especially if management is around. So, I think it's important to have a safe space.
And we have a gal who drives that program. She does a fantastic job with it, but she spent a lot of her time focusing more on how to make the conversations feel safe and to make them a place without judgment. Probably as much time on that as she has focused on the content of those talks.
It's nice.
So I thought it might be nice. We're clearly winding down a little bit. Let's use the time, take some questions from the audience, and anybody who's specifically in the panel interested in answering that question, go ahead and chime up. Otherwise, I'll add another question.
I have a question.
Are there any in the chat that we haven't discussed?
I think Julia was watching most of them. A lot of discussion. Actually, I don't know, Julia, I'll ask this question if you want to try to scan back. But so we spoke a lot about like a scenario where you might be considering accepting a job and red flags that might, catch your attention and make you think, no, that won't maybe be the right fit for me. I'm wondering if anyone could give voice to, I am in a job and I think red flags are popping up, and how to maybe reconcile the sense that, maybe I'm comfortable, inertia is real, whatever. How do we kind of maybe push ourselves to make that effort to change and align kind of our insides with our outsides?
To maybe leave the company, or just to so one thing I want to add, because I think it's super important, because when I reflect back, it's one of the biggest mistakes I make, still do on occasion. And it seems obvious and easy, but I do it every time, and that's, I do not trust my intuition. I am telling you, when I make the biggest mistakes in my career is because there's a voice in my ear that says something is not right here, or saying run Forrest run, and I don't. Or I accept a role and there's that voice in my ear going, God, something here stinks. Every time. So I think learning to trust your intuition when something can't rationalize it, if something doesn't feel right, probably means something isn't right.
You nailed it. That's great advice. And I make those mistakes still.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's about just realizing how you feel, and nobody wants to wake up in the morning and dread going to work. And I think you know, I mean, sometimes the inertia is real. You know, you need a paycheck. It's, you know, it's sometimes it's difficult to look for a job when you have a job, all of that. But sometimes you just know you're blocked. There's no more growth. You're not doing anything exciting. There's no passion for the work. If you pay attention, you're able to know, like, hey, my whole mind is screaming at me to get out. So you just have to open up and, you know, make yourself make the move.
Yeah. I'll also add, I think it's good to also recognize what you're willing to take a run at changing. Because if there's something you don't like about your current situation, you have to really have a come to Jesus with yourself of, is this something that I have the energy for or desire to try and make better? Is the rest of the variables in this equation really good? You know, and this thing's hurting. Can I try and figure out strategies to fix it? If the answer is no, then that's probably a good indicator that maybe, you know, the red flag is too large to avoid.
Well, I think sometimes, Dan, to build on that, you really have to kind of, I think you have to realize that there's some things you can't change. You just can't, right? You can't, you know, if your CEO is a jerk, there is no way you're coming into that company and changing that, right? And so, you know, maybe it's time to move on then.
And the flip side of it too, I think though, is that, you know, there are going to be times when things don't feel great, right? So there'll be, it's identifying whether this is a long-term or a short-term issue. It's kind of like marriage, right? They tell you if you've been married for a long time, you're gonna have times where you're gonna have to put work in and times where it's gonna be easy. My job's like that too, if you're there for a while. So it's, you know, is this something where I can put work in and fix it? Or is this, you know, so much effort that I don't want to put the work in, it's not worth it. Or I don't have the authority to do this. But I think expecting it always to be excited 100% of the time, I don't think that's realistic. There are gonna be times where it requires work. It is a job. But if it doesn't have you excited 99% of the time, that's the time to look at it too.
Time for divorce. Thank
Exactly,
you.
right? What's that balance?
So I feel like we missed Linda's
There's a question in the
Yeah.
chat.
Well, I was thinking, like, didn't we miss Linda's question on process? Is that what else?
That was about design process, and I don't know, I would go out on a limb and say that is its own presentation. The design process, which we can all argue about for hours. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm happy to chat offline, Linda, but I think any of us would, but I'd be interested in knowing whether you mean with regard to values or the process, like objectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
I think her second question is interesting for maybe a gut check response. When interviewing with a panel interview for a job, would you suggest presenting one project in depth or multiple projects to show the growth of the thought process? For context, Linda is a boot camp graduate, and I'll add that I am myself as well. So we're in a kind of a different.
Deep dive on one project and then have multiple projects to show your range of skills.
Long as you own a fair amount of space in that project. The one thing I get very, for me is a red flag when I interview someone. And if they are presenting a project and they're trying to pretend they own the project and they did the whole project, and it's very clear that they did not, because that's not going to be someone who works great in a team, right?
Oh boy, that's a great answer, Melissa. You know, and I've heard that like from multiple people. In fact, I may have heard that from Dan as well. Boy, be careful. If you go in and you do a presentation and you're not giving other people credit for the work that they contributed, that is a huge red flag, because yeah.
Also, if you don't,
oh, go
go ahead.
I say it's not a knock against you showing that you worked with all these different people, right? You don't have to own, especially if you're interviewing someone junior. I am not expecting them to own the entire problem space for everything they do. I'm excited to see that they worked with other people. I want to see how those handoffs worked. I want to see how they collaborated. I want them to be able to speak to that. I want them to understand the values of the different roles they worked with, right? There's all those different things. So I don't think it's something to be afraid of sharing either.
No, it's
so-
not just, go ahead. Yeah.
So I just wanted to give more context too. So I definitely have a lot of transferable skills as a behavioral therapist. I do talk about it in my interviews. I was just curious about like, should I be wanting, because throughout all my projects, I didn't work on a team. For my boot camp, I went to Thinkful. I wish we had a team project and a client project. I did do everything myself, the design, the research. The one thing I did with my third project was really hone in on the research to highlight my ability to prioritize research methods and talk about what I expect as an outcome by using them. I think what I'm envisioning is putting these projects in a case study deck and then showing exactly how I progress and advance in my thought process. Or should I use one project in depth and just go into depth for that 45-minute presentation?
I think I would keep those other projects as backup. I want to see where you're at now. I'm kind of interested in where you came in, but what I'm most interested in seeing is where you are at now, where your thought process is now, what you can do, how you can show me process, right? How you can show me how you thought through the problem space and got to where you got. And then have those other items as backup, right? So if there's a question, interviews can go all over the place. Someone says, well, what about that? Oh, let me show you that. I've done something that can apply to that. Here's how I got there. So really knowing your portfolio as well and having it ready to be a very flexible and agile thing during that conversation, I think can be super helpful. And that's an impressive interview skill. When I see someone who can do those things too and talk through it and respond to different questions that are thrown at them and pull out different information, because that's what we do when we share our research, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that would be good. Just expanding on one project, because I think the recruiter did say it's just one project, but if I feel comfortable with adding more than one project, yeah, I think
don't ignore your background, because your background makes you really unique too. Having that research background, that's cool. That's interesting. That sticks with us when we're sitting there and going through, like, we interviewed these 10 candidates. But Linda was really interesting. Remember, she talked about that. Right, those kind of things bring diversity to team. They bring different perspectives. I bring that to the conversation. I like that.
Yeah. Alrighty. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's, in fact, we're 1 minute over, and I want to make sure we respect everybody's time because we've got other things going on. I want to express my gratitude to this panel. I thought it was a great talk, and I just love these things because I learned so much from some really great people. So thanks for your time.
Thank you for putting it together for us, Pete.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen so we can see our finishing slide as well. Share. Yes. So yes, thank you so much to our panelists and our fantastic participants. I really thought this was a really good conversation, and it was a good flow of questions and feedback. So we really appreciate all of your time this evening. If you want to join us next month, we'll be speaking with Michael Hawley about remote collaborative workshops, optimizing creativity and ideation when you're stuck behind a screen. And I think Christine said that's about taking the remote to the in-person work is the more translated version of that item. So that's September 22nd. And again, thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences and your advice and your questions. And hope to see you again on Zoom or in person, even some of you maybe someday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.